we already inject the message service in the message input component. Now, in order to get this list of messages, the logical place to also inject it would be the message list component here, where we have the array of messages. So let's do that. Let's add a constructor here too, where I then also set up a message service property and tell Angler2 that this should be of type message service, which also needs to be imported here at the top, of course. Remember, that alone won't do the trick. We also have to add the providers array here to provide the message service like this. With that, we got access to the message service here too, and we could call this getMessage, yes, by the way, method here to get all the messages. Now, in the message list component, we could do this in the constructor, but a good practice is to use the ng-on-init lifecycle hook for, well, anything else which is beyond very basic initializations. The ng-on-init lifecycle hook is one of the lifecycle hooks Angler2 reaches when creating such a component. It will reach several lifecycles, and you can learn more about this in dedicated Angler2 courses. But a very important hook is the onInit lifecycle hook, which is executed once the component has been initialized by Angler2. Remember, it's doing this in the background. With this add component decorator, we give Angler2 the chance to initialize such a component. So in order to implement this lifecycle hook method, I implement an interface which is called onInit and which needs to be imported from @AngularCore. What this interface does is it requires me to implement a method called ng-on-init in this class, otherwise I will get an error. Now, with this interface, I'm telling Angler2, since it requires me to implement this method, that I do have this method, which makes it safe for Angler2 to execute this method once it reaches the onInit lifecycle phase. It won't execute it by default, because I might not have this method, but if I do have it, and I indicate this with the implementation of this interface, it will run this method automatically. So in this method, which is called after the component has been initialized, after the properties have been initialized, I can simply say this messages equals this message service get messages, which will give me this array. Now here's an important note. I'm assigning this messages, which I now can simply clear here, to this array I'm having in my message service. Keep in mind, arrays and objects in JavaScript are reference types, which means if I assign this array from the service to the array in this component, as I'm doing here, this is one and the same object. These are not two different objects. I'm not creating a copy here. I'm simply copying the pointer, which points to the same place in memory. So this messages in this component points to the same array as I have here in the message service, which is great because this means that whenever I add a message from some other place in the application, it is added to this array, which happens to be the same as in the message list component, which means the list will automatically get updated. So once you see this automatic updating, keep this in mind that this is happening because we're using the same messages array here due to how reference types work in JavaScript. Enough of the talking, so I hooked this up. So with that, if I save this, what we should see upon reloading this application is that initially this is now empty. We don't have any messages anymore, which makes sense because I deleted it here. I'm fetching it from the message service, which is empty at the beginning. So let's add a new message here. And after I click save, we should see it appear down there. Well, nothing is happening. Why is that? Well, I'm going to have a look at this in the next video.